Hello and welcome to Hollywood at Home from Arizona Public Media. I'm Victoria Lucas. Tonight, we are proud to bring you writer-director Orson Welles' 1941 classic, Citizen Kane, regarded in critics' polls for decades as the greatest film of all time. If you saw it in the past, it's time to take another look, as every new viewing reveals details you missed before. And if you've never seen it, then you owe it to yourself to experience this innovative masterpiece far ahead of its time. And I'll let you in on a long-forgotten secret. Welles required what critic Roger Ebert would later call one of the miracles of cinema to get the picture made at all. At only 24 years of age, Orson Welles and his Mercury Theater Repertory Company were already known for a series of acclaimed Broadway productions when CBS invited Welles to create a dramatic series for radio, which he did, including 1938's famous War of the Worlds Halloween broadcast that terrified much of the country with its dramatic and seemingly real news coverage of a Martian invasion. Well, Hollywood studios quickly recognized that Welles had a gift for attracting attention and, more importantly, audiences. But Welles surprised everyone by turning down several projects until finally RKO Pictures made him an offer he couldn't refuse. First, they brought him to Hollywood for a tour of the studio, after which he famously declared, "It's the greatest electric train set a boy could ever have." They then offered the young man, who had never directed a single frame of film, an unprecedented deal allowing him complete freedom within a limited budget to write, produce, direct, and act in 3 feature films, employing his own cast and crew, and most unusual of all, having final cut on his film, meaning the studio couldn't interfere. Well, with contract in hand, Welles then partnered with top Hollywood screenwriter Herman Mankiewicz to create a script. It would paint a definitive portrait of American megalomania, the meteoric rise and precipitous fall of a newspaper magnate named Charles Foster Kane, based loosely on the life of William Randolph Hearst, whom Mankiewicz knew socially and disliked intensely. And instead of writing a traditional chronological narrative, they decided to tell Kane's story entirely through a jigsaw puzzle of flashbacks, where we learn about the man through the often contradictory memories of the people who knew, or thought they knew, him best. Simultaneously, Welles began working to put together a cast and crew, and one of the key elements dropped right into his lap. Renowned cinematographer Greg Toland, who'd won an Oscar the year before for Wuthering Heights, showed up at Welles' office and asked to be on the film. Toland later explained that he knew the first-time director's reputation for audacious experimentation in the theater, and he hoped Welles would let him try new and innovative camera techniques that most Hollywood studios would never allow. When it came time to cast the film, Welles didn't want movie stars or even actors with film credits. Instead, he cast himself in the lead role and brought in supporting actors from his New York Repertory Company. The film marked the screen debut of a number of actors who went on to long careers, most notably Joseph Cotten and Agnes Moorehead. But the question was what to do with all these people and equipment in this medium so new to Welles. True, he was known in New York as the boy genius, But he was also smart enough to know when he needed help and talented enough to know how to use what he got. RKO production advisor Miriam Geiger compiled a handmade textbook for Welles to help him understand film techniques, and he taught himself a great deal by studying the work of great directors, most notably that of John Ford. As he said later, for about a month, I'd watch Stagecoach every night after dinner, often with a different technician or department head from the studio, and I'd ask questions. How was this done? Why was this done? It was like going to school. And through it all, he didn't overlook his Mercury Theater actors, who also had a sharp learning curve because acting for the camera requires different techniques than acting on a stage. As Moorhead later remembered, Orson trained us for films at the same time he was training himself. Welles also had lengthy planning sessions with art director Perry Ferguson about every aspect of the look of the film, later calling Ferguson the unsung hero for creating ornate sets on a severely limited budget. Photography began on June 29, 1940, a Saturday morning when Welles hoped few inquisitive studio executives would be around. Despite all his preparations, Welles faced enormous pressure as he walked onto the set that first day. When asked later where he got the confidence to direct a film so radically different from other movies, he laughed, "Ignorance, sheer ignorance. I didn't know there were things you couldn't do, so anything I could think up in my dreams, I attempted to photograph." As the director, star, and producer of the picture, Welles often worked 16 to 18 hours a day, long after his cast and crew had gone home, spending his evenings watching dailies and planning the next day's work. He was heavily involved in post-production, too, even as the film was being shot. RKO had assigned Welles an editor, whom he promptly fired, and hired instead young Robert Wise, who would go on to become a multiple Oscar-winning director. Wise started cutting scenes together using each day's dailies so that Welles could be sure he had all the angles he needed for a sequence. Wise later said, "I could see that Orson was creating something very special. It was outstanding film, day after day." For the musical score, Welles chose another Mercury Theater alumnus, composer Bernard Herrmann, for his very first film job. Herrmann would later create memorable scores for Alfred Hitchcock, perhaps most notably in Psycho. So, the miracle of cinema that Roger Ebert referred to was a first-time director, a cynical, hard-drinking writer, an innovative cinematographer, and a group of New York stage and radio actors who were given the keys to a studio and complete control, and they made a masterpiece. When the film's story was revealed at preview screenings, William Randolph Hearst reacted predictably with outrage, threatening libel suits, forcing repeated postponements of the premiere, and refusing to let any of his newspapers even mention the movie. Citizen Kane opened on May 1st, 1941, to glowing reviews, but pressure from Hearst and his friends in the film industry kept it out of many theaters, forcing the film to close its first run without making a profit. Still, the film was nominated for 9 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director and Actor for Orson Welles, Best Art Direction, Cinematography, Editing, Sound, and Musical Score, winning 1, Best Original Screenplay for Herman Mankiewicz and Orson Welles. And the movie was re-released to a wider audience 4 years later, continuing on to take its rightful place as a cinematic masterpiece. So now please sit back and discover, or rediscover, what might be the most dazzling debut feature in motion picture history. From 1941, it's Orson Welles' production of Citizen Kane.